I am joined with Scott Rumple out of West Jordan, Utah, who follows whichever NFL team has the player on his fantasy football team he needs to win.
I follow
So,
the red zone. That's my favorite team.
okay, red zone, that works. Everyone, welcome Scott. He's not one of our original owners, and so I thought it would be fun to get an interesting perspective on somebody that's joined our league, not from the beginning. Scott started his first fantasy football game ever with us, so why don't we start there? Scott, you were thrown right into the fire. Tell us about the experience when you started fantasy football.
I don't remember why I suddenly decided to get into it because I remember you asked me the first go around. You're like, "Hey man, do you want to do fantasy football?" I was like, "Sports? What? No." And I know you played fantasy a few years, and then a couple years later, I couldn't tell you why I changed my mind. I was like, "Oh yeah, let's give this fantasy thing a try." So I signed up. You're like, "Hey man, this is pretty serious. It's like $100, and you can't fuck up, and you got to be active." I was like, "Oh shit, I guess I can do that." But here we are now. I'm pretty much hooked. So
It was pretty funny. For your first league, you really jumped in with both feet.
yeah.
So I feel like you really got hooked to our particular hybrid keeper league when you landed Giovanni Bernard. Can you walk me through your relationship with this player? I want you to start at the beginning when you acquired him and bring us all the way to today's date.
So yeah, I mean, like I didn't even know what fantasy was. I basically watched the Super Bowl every year, but besides that, I didn't know much about football. So I joined this high stakes fantasy league, and the first year was the original NFL style draft. So I was doing my research by watching Sports Center because I didn't know any better at the time. And I actually was watching Hard Knocks on HBO, and they were highlighting the Bengals that year, and I saw Gio, and he was on some rookies to watch list. So I drafted him, and he was basically the only positive thing about my first year. So I think I finished that year 2-11. Obviously, didn't make the playoffs. I don't remember exactly how we established keeper rules, but he was basically going to be my only keeper, and he ended up being pretty good. So, every week Lindsay heard me saying, "Oh, it's my boy Gio." So she bought me the jersey for Christmas, and here we are now. And unfortunately, I had to part ways with him this year.
What would force that kind of a situation?
For parting ways with him?
Yeah.
Well, Jamal Charles is clearly the better running back. As much as I love Gio, and I made a trade with Bobby in the offseason, which was Mike Wallace and Giovanni Bernard for Jamal Charles and $10, which definitely worked out in my favor. Even though Jamal Charles got hurt, I picked up Charkandrick West because he was the handcuff, and if you add Charles and West, I think they're like the number 2 running back to date if you combine their point totals. And Gio's doing pretty good still, but he's not number 2 overall.
That's fair. It's pretty impressive you're able to part ways when it was time to move on, but some of us get really hooked to our players. You're entering, I want to say your third season with us now?
Yeah.
Okay. So since the keeper rules were established in which we spend money to keep our keepers, there's only one keeper you retained throughout the seasons, and that has been Russell Wilson. Why have you stuck with him, and was it the right call, and what are we going to do about next year?
Well, I actually didn't have him in the first year. I traded him from Chris in the off season.
I remember you passed on Andrew Luck.
No.
Oh,
You had
I offered Luck.
well, maybe yeah. Anyway,
Anyway.
I wasn't sold on Luck in 2013 to 14 or whatever it was.
Right.
But I got Russell Wilson for who was the backup for Ray Rice?
Oh, was it
Bernard
for?
Pierce. It was
Oh,
Bernard
Pierce.
Pierce in the offseason. I got Russell Wilson for Bernard Pierce, and that definitely panned out in my favor last year. Russell Wilson was awesome. I think he finished as the number 3 quarterback. So you told me he was going to be terrible last year, and I was so happy because he did really well, and I was glad I kept him. But this year, it's definitely backfired. I could have kept Carson Palmer for $6, but I kept Wilson for I kept him for 24, which is like a terrible choice in hindsight. But at the time, I thought it was the right call, and that's why I'm 5-5 and not a contender for the playoffs right now.
What's his price for next season?
Next season, Russell will be. Oh, 24, which he's going back in the pool.
Yeah, you're done. All right, time to move on.
Yeah.
While we're talking about keepers for next season, I do see some exciting players on your roster. I see Matt Jones, which I believe you drafted, and you've managed to hold on to him, and Charkandrick West, which is Jamal Charles' backup, which you snagged off waivers. What are their futures with your team? What do you expect out of them?
So Alfred Morris is not going to be with the Redskins next year. That's pretty clear. Matt Jones is clearly the future, so I'm happy I can keep him for 10. Charkandrick West is kind of a wild card because Jamal Charles is at that age where he could come back and be relevant, but I don't know if the Chiefs can put the genie back in the bottle, so we'll see how that pans out next year. But at $6, I'm happy that I can keep West potentially. Then I'm also pretty happy about Ingram. He just signed his contract last year. He's currently the number 2 running back, and I can keep him for 19. So if those three pan out, I could potentially keep 3 great running backs for less than $30, which would be really good going into 2016.
How would you change your thoughts on West based on how Jamal Charles? If he comes back and he's playing starting running back, and
It's
do you
there's
hang
too
on
many
to that?
variables at this point. I mean, if he's going to be the backup to Jamal Charles and that's all it is next year, I don't know if I'm going to keep a handcuff for $6. But there's he's getting Jamal Charles will be 30 next year, I think. So who knows how that might go? There's always a chance he could get traded. There's just too many factors to decide right now. But the lottery ticket's definitely there, and if it pans out in my favor, he could be pretty money going forward.
Yeah, I guess you can't drop him at that cheap of a price no matter what, right?
Yeah, I mean, at this point, I'm definitely keeping him and starting him for the rest of the season. But next year is just, I guess we'll see. Hope for the best.
All right, so let's talk about budgeting in this league. We do have a unique hybrid system in which players are assigned a value, and their value goes up each year that they're consecutively retained on a team. You were the first person ever in this league to actually trade off-season waiver dollars, so dollars specific to the draft. It's always been an open option, but nobody's actually managed to work it into a draft until you did. Did it work out? Do you recommend this?
Yeah, I mean, even though Jamal Charles ended up getting hurt, I was able to keep him effectively for $54 because in the trade that I acquired him, I got 10 bonus dollars. So I traded away my boy Gio and Mike Wallace. Ooh, big loss there for me. And I got Jamal Charles, who was excellent through about 6-7 weeks till he got hurt. But because I had him, I did get Charkandrick West, and like I said, if you combine their 2-point totals together, he's the number 2 running back to date. So it definitely worked in my favor. I think more people should look into doing that, especially in the offseason, because it gives you some good options as far as keepers go. I wouldn't have kept Jamal Charles if it was $64. That's just too much of your budget, but I basically got him at a $10 discount by working in those trade dollars.
That's fair. You are also the only team in the entire league to be under a $200 salary cap. If you wanted, you could retain every single player on your team down to the kicker, down to the defensive team, down to your benches on a third handcuff. How do you find yourself in this situation? Why is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? What does this indicate?
I'm pretty happy with my situation going forward. I thought I was going to do really well at the start of the year, and I started out like 1-5 or 2-5. So I was like, okay, somehow I done goofed this whole season. Better start playing for the future. And basically, starting at week 5 or 6, I basically was planning for next year, not this year. I figured I wasn't going to win, but I've actually won my last 3 or 4 games, and I'm now 7th overall. If the playoffs started today, I'd miss it, but I'm just losing a points for tiebreaker right now for the wild card spot. So I still have a chance, which doesn't make any sense because when I'm planning for this year, I suck, but when I'm planning for next year, somehow I win. So I'm excited for my prospects, but fantasy football is a fickle bitch sometimes.
Now, you do have the ability to keep your entire roster. What kind of percentage do you see yourself keeping of that?
There's a lot of rookie wild cards that I've got that I'm excited about. Some of my high dollar keepers are definitely going back, like Russell Wilson, not keeping him. He just hasn't performed this year, and he's $25. Probably Tyrod Taylor's going back. I don't think he's that great to keep him, but some of the rookie running backs that I have and some of the other receivers that I have are definitely great wild cards, or lottery tickets, I should say, and depending how the offseason goes, I could see myself keeping a lot of them. But at this point, I'm thinking I'm going to be keeping Matt Jones, depending on how it goes. Maybe West, definitely Ingram. If Forsett retires, Javorius Allen could be a great keeper. Uh, Landry and Brandon Cooks are looking really good. So, and definitely Tyler Eifert. So, feeling good about next year.
That is quite a few. So if you had to pick one and predict how many points per dollar, so basically what's your best value player? Which player on your team represents a stud that you're getting at a discount price? What's the top dog?
I guess I've got to go with Ingram, even though he'll be 19 to keep next year. He is currently the number 2 running back in our format. So at $19 to get a first-round draft pick, you can't go wrong there.
You
So
can't. No, I'd have to agree with you on that one. Very good. Ingram's going to be the next jersey we might see you in then, maybe?
I don't know. I've actually got an Aaron Rodgers en route right now.
Aaron Rodgers.
Discount double check.
Okay, let's talk about a little bit of a deficiency we've noticed on your team this season. A new metric I started measuring this season is coaching. In order to determine that, I look at how many points were scored, your team put up, versus how many points they could have put up if you had an optimal lineup in there. Now, I think you have a theory as to why your coaching is so low, so I was hoping you could share that with us.
Oh, I can tell you exactly why my coaching's low. Through 10 weeks, I've carried 2 tight ends since the start of the season. Through 10 weeks, I have yet to pick the correct tight end. I've only started 2 twice. In the 2 weeks that I started both tight ends, I won. But in the other 8 weeks, I've started the wrong tight end. I've started Tyler Eifert 4 times when Delaney Walker outscored him on my bench, and the exact same vice versa. And it's basically the opposite of what the matchup would dictate. I just pick wrong every week. And the other one is Matt Jones. He's scored 26 points twice on my bench. And based on your coaching algorithm, I could have swapped him in for a player who scored 0 one week and 4 another week. So based on my math, I've missed out on 100 total points of points for on the season by 2 weeks of Matt Jones going off on my bench and starting the wrong tight end every single week.
That would add up. I think the lesson we've learned here is you shouldn't carry 2 tight ends.
They're both good, though. I can't. Anyway, yeah, that's the reason my coaching sucks.
All right. So we've had I've received a lot of flack about the metric of coaching. Pretty much everybody's complained about it. Is this a useful metric in looking at teams? Does it tell us anything? Or does it just really point out which teams have the worst bench?
I don't know. It does and it doesn't. Like, if you're a great team, it's harder to do good at coaching because there's chances that you're going to have a bench player blow up, and that's just hard to predict. But if you're like the shittiest team in the league and you have garbage on your bench, you're going to have great coaching every week just because you have no depth. So I definitely like the coaching metric. I don't know if I have a solution to make it more refined. I've got my brain going, but I like it. But yeah, I mean, it's definitely not perfect yet.
Yeah, I have noticed the same thing as well. I do want to point out that the number 1 team in the league does have the highest coaching rate. It's probably a coincidence, but I do think it's important to at least note that.
That would point to the good side of it because you do have to start your best players every week because your actual points are the only thing that counts. Bench points are great if you want to be like, oh yeah, I've got the best team, but I never start the right guys. But if I would have won. Like, that doesn't mean anything for you, but it still is true that a good team will probably also have a deeper bench, which would mean lower coaching percentage. I think both are true there.
Yeah, it's a hard one, and it takes the most time from me, so I might just scrap it. All right, I want to get to the real meat of this discussion. You are sitting 7th for the playoff picture. You've already described just how close you are to entering that playoff picture. What's the plan here? Are you going for it all? Are you already looking at next season? I mean, can you make the playoffs? And if so, how is that going to happen? What scenario needs to play out for us to see you in the playoffs?
So with 3 more games to go, I'd say I need to win 2 of my next 3 to make the playoffs and put up some pretty good point totals to win any tiebreakers. I'm definitely still alive, but when I was 2-5, I started playing for next year, and I'm on a 3-game winning streak right now, which sort of doesn't make sense because I stopped caring about this year. So I'm definitely still going for this year. I'm pretty happy about my Amendola pickup. I picked him up on Sunday, the same day that Edelman got hurt, and I think he'll be able to basically replace 80 or 90% of Edelman. So I basically acquired a top 10 wide receiver, I think, I hope. So I'm definitely still alive. It's really going to come down to the division games. I'm only 1 game behind you right now. You definitely have the points for tiebreaker. I think you're 60 or 80 points ahead of me. But as it stands now, I'm still 7th, so we'll see. I'm still trying.
So of your 3 matchups, which are you most likely to win? You're in division games. I know for a fact you've got me and Bobby you'll be playing. I don't know who your third person is.
I'm playing against Ricky in my other one, so it's not
Ooh.
looking good this week because I also have Ingram and Cooks on bye, which are 2 of my better players. So on paper, it's not looking good for this week. But Ricky's team's been shit in the bed lately. Um,
It's been
so
fading down the stretch for sure. And
yeah,
Deion
I
Lewis
think
loss was pretty rough.
Dion Lewis, and then I don't even. That was 2 weeks ago. This week he just put up, I think, the lowest score in the league. So it's definitely possible. Um, I'm still actively trying to win this year, but we'll see. I've got a decent chance. I think you're right upset 50-50, which is about what I'd say I have. But considering I've been planning for next year, I'm happy that I'm still in the hunt just by chance mostly.
Right on. All right, so we're going to step away from fantasy football and talk about something you've got going on the side. Well, I guess it's still fantasy football related. You decided to attack daily fantasy football sports, so your FanDuel and DraftKings this year. I know you plan to attack it with a strategy, and you were going to play season long. And how's that going? How much money did you put in? How much money have you made? What have you found? Is it fun?
It's definitely fun. I'm definitely down on the year, but it's because I play the contest that you're supposed to lose. For the most part, I enter the Millionaire Maker, which is this year it's on average on DraftKings about 400,000 or 450,000. More or less the top 100,000 cash, which is the top 25%. Which if it's just a lottery, you're going to lose that 3 out of 4 times, which is about what I've done. Um, I've got a really great track record for 50-50s, but you don't even double up your money. You've got to beat the rake. So it's not as much fun to play those. It's definitely a higher success rate, but I get the most enjoyment out of the Millionaire Maker. My highest cash this year is $100 in that, but I'm definitely down on the year.
How much? Give us a number.
Oh, I'm far in the red. I put $200 in, and I'm barely scraping along at this point.
You have $64 of waiver money remaining on your team. We're in week 10. I don't know if that's the most in the league. That's certainly close to 3 times the amount I'm holding on my team. Is this why? Where is this intentional?
Oh, definitely intentional. Like I said, after I started the season pretty rocky, mainly due to all of my wide receivers shitting the bed. My 4 receivers going into the season were Andre Johnson, Roddy White, Brandon Cooks, and Golden Tate, and I figured between the 4 of those, I'd be able to start 2 every week and be pretty okay. Andre Johnson and Roddy White, basically worthless. I don't think they're rostered in any format for the most part. Brandon Cooks had a really slow start, and Golden Tate, well, I guess the Lions in general have been struggling heavily the whole year. So I did start 2 and 5, and then I told myself, well, let's start playing for next year. So in every waiver ad that I did, I was specifically bidding low amounts in the hopes that I'd strike on a keeper. Because there's no point to spend $20 on a guy if you're not going to try and keep him next year, which is why I'm able to keep my entire roster at this point.
So your intention wasn't to be at $64 in week 10. It was to have a shotgun barrage of potential keepers on your bench for dirt cheap.
Yeah, my roster compared to now at the start of the season is only 4 or 5 guys the same, and everyone I've picked up is a young player with some sort of potential, whether that be running back handcuff, rookie on a good offense, whatever the case may be. Most of the guys on my team are people that I would be potentially keeping next year if everything pans out the way it could possibly pan out.
Okay, so what are you gonna blow $64 on it? Where's that going? You gonna
Well,
throw
I
in-
mean, if on the long shot I do make it into the playoffs, I'll have the
are we
ability
going to see $20 defenses in the playoffs? Is that what's
Well,
going to happen here?
I mean, that's the option before me. If somehow I make it into the playoffs, I feel I'll be able to muscle out anybody as far as streaming defenses go, or injury players. And by the time you get into the playoffs, you can spend $20 on a defense for that specific week if you need to. So I'm still planning for next year, but if it works in my favor, I'll have a waiver wire advantage in the playoffs.
All right, fair enough. It'll be exciting to see that. I don't think anybody else has done that. I could be wrong though. And with that, we're going to call it a wrap. Thanks for joining me tonight, Scott.
Hey, thanks, Zach.